This includes, but is not limited to, the radio station, the radio volume, the heat, or the air conditioner. Quoting traffic laws while the vehicle is in motion may result in severe head trauma. Don't believe everything you think. Sorry for driving so close in front of you. These are bumper stickers, obviously. Not worth stealing. If you can read this, I'm not impressed. Most people can read. TV is gooder than books. And last one is, I break for tailgaters. We'll leave it there. Okay. All right, we'll get started here. We're continuing on creationism. It's really, I say this every week, but really the foundation of our faith. You know, if God created us, if there's a God, there's evidence of it, and that's what we're looking at. And I think one of the biggest things that destroys people's faith, especially young people, they go to high school, they get taught this stuff, college, and look up at these professors, and they must know what they're talking about, and they swallow that. And if we evolve, there must be no God, and so that really one thing that really harms people's faith. But as we watched that video a few weeks ago, they don't have the answers. Okay, the guy just asked a simple question: can you tell me, have you seen one species change to another? And they just can't answer. Okay, they have all the answers. Don't question science, but it's a simple question. And then they ask the college students, none of them can answer, and then they ask the professors, and they don't have an answer. So this thing, they want you to believe science has all the, science has all the answers, and we're scientists and we know everything. Don't question us. And then, we kind of learned in COVID that, they're changing every couple of weeks. Don't question us now. We've got the truth. Don't question us. So it's not a bunch of unbiased people that know everything. Okay, they're looking at the evidence and they're interpreting it one way, and it can be interpreted another. So we're really looking at the evidence. What does the evidence show us? Okay, nobody was there. We don't observe evolution happening, and we're looking at the evidence. Does it fit creation, or does it fit Darwin's theory? And we looked at the fossil record. And what do you think, if we've been evolving for millions of years according to them, what would we find? Thousands of intermediate fossils, wouldn't we? Because things are constantly evolving. We'd have half legs, we'd have half, arms, we'd have half, wings. There'd be all this evidence, and we don't see any of it. And even Darwin admitted it, and many evolutionists actually admit it. They say things are found fully formed, and they start that way and they end that way, just the way they were. And the fossil record really disproves evolution. Darwin said, we'll find them. Okay, they're out there. This is the problem. They're working backwards. They're not working from evidence. We have this assumption, this theory, and we'll find the evidence for it. Okay, they're not looking at the evidence without bias and saying, what does it fit? They don't have that. Okay, and the other thing is, how do things change? And they said, mutations. Okay, things mutated. And I know growing up, X-Men and, mutants, and we, I want to be a mutant. I want to have superpowers. Well, that's not really what mutations do. Mutations scramble information. Okay, they're extremely rare, and they're mostly harmful. Okay, nobody is asking for a mutation. Nobody wants their child to have an abnormality. Okay, and the problem with mutations is, does it create new information? No. Okay, it doesn't create any new information. It just scrambles and makes it worse, the information that's there. So we see the evidence is mounting against evolution. So we're going to look at Charles Darwin a little bit and his theories and what he came up with. He was the son of a wealthy English physician. As a youngster, he enjoyed collecting shells and bird eggs. He studied medicine for a while at the University of Edinburgh and later theology at Cambridge. Interesting, founder of Darwinism or evolution, studied theology. He was generally bored with education. The event that changed his life came in 1831 when the young man was hired as a naturalist on the HMS Beagle, exploring ship on a global excursion that would last 5 years. One part of the voyage that greatly intrigued Darwin was a visit to the Galapagos Islands, several hundred miles off the west coast of South America. He noticed that plants and animals differed from island to island. The finches, some of you probably remember, I don't know if you went to public school, you remember seeing these little finches in your textbooks, particularly impressed him. Each island seemed to have its own variety with a distinctive beak. Some had large beaks used for cracking seeds, others slender beaks suited for catching insects. Some had beaks ideal for probing flowers. One type even had a wood-boring beak with which it grabbed cactus spines to search inside trees. These finches did not appear to interbreed. So he concluded that they had a common ancestor, that each variety had adapted to its environment. From this and similar observations of other creatures, Darwin inferred that all species, the entire plant and animal kingdoms, had resulted from environmental adaptations over eons. Okay, so he took a little bit, he sees this, and then he makes this huge assumption that, everything evolved over eons. This contradicted the belief widely held that species were immutable. It means unchangeable. It also contested the Judeo-Christian view that God had created all life forms. Okay, so that's the common belief of the age, that God had created everything, and then he's coming along and saying, well, maybe God didn't create everything, maybe it just happened by itself. It was not until a century later, in 1859, that Darwin summed up his observations in The Origin of the Species. But the book caused a sensation and immediately sold out. Darwin was a good student of nature. He correctly observed that animals have variations related to environmental adaptation. Okay, we can see that. His mistake was assuming without evidence that an organism has unlimited adaptive power and so could transform into a completely different class of animal. Okay, so he took this, he sees this a little bit and then says, well, it can do this. Okay, and he doesn't have evidence for it, didn't see it. Okay, and he just made this wild assumption. In other words, that fish could, given enough time in the right environments, could become an ape. Okay, that's quite a leap from a little variations in beaks to fish becoming an ape. He wrote of natural selection, he said, by this process long continued, it seems to me almost certain that an ordinary hoofed quadruped might be converted into a giraffe. Okay, so he's taking one little evidence, something we can see, a little variation, and saying, a fish can turn into an ape, and we're going to, little cells can turn into humans. Darwin recorded 13 species of finch, and I have them quotes, in the Galapagos. But what did he actually see? Differences in the beaks, tails, and plumage of these birds. Okay, so there's nothing earth-shattering about variation in nature. People vary, okay? Just look at this room, okay? Just look at me standing next to my wife, She's down here and I'm up here. There's variation everywhere, okay? Unless you're identical twins, and then everything's the same except fingerprints, right? Okay, so that's the only time there's not variation. There's two identical twins here. Just like snowflakes. We have blonde hair, brown hair, red hair, okay, different eye color, different height, okay. Nobody has the same fingerprints. But these distinctions, they don't separate us into multiple species, do they? Okay, there's huge variation just in this room on planet Earth. I think there's a tribe in Africa, and they're all really tall, and that's where they go to recruit basketball players. A few famous basketball players are from there, and the tribes are just, massive. And you got pygmy people, that are just really short. In New Guinea and that, we see massive variations, but we wouldn't say, well, that's not a different species. We're all human. The idea that beak variations constitute species is controversial. Pigeons vary in appearance more than Darwin's finches, yet they are considered all part of one species. Dogs differ markedly, but are regarded as one species. Okay, what have we done? We've bred different characteristics. We have all sorts of, from little poodles to, Rottweilers and, German Shepherds, and we've bred over years different, but they're all dogs, right? They're all one species. There's huge variation. You have a Great Danes and you have Dobermans. I had somebody we knew, and they had a Doberman, and I decided to take the Doberman when I was a teenager for a walk, and I realized that Doberman was taking me for a walk, and wherever it wanted to go, I was following. I was just hanging on. If it wanted to investigate something, I'm trying to hold it, and that thing, I could not hold the dog. It was just taking me for a walk. But we have variation. We don't think, oh, they're different species. So we see more variation in humans and dogs than we do in these finches. Furthermore, although Darwin believed the finches did not interbreed, recently they found that they actually do. Okay, they've demonstrated some of them do, resulting in hybrids. Okay, so he didn't realize that they interbred, so they really are the same species. Jonathan Weiner, who reported this in the book The Beak of the Finch, noted, strange as it seems, these hybrids are the fittest finches on the island. Okay, what Darwin observed was not separate species, but ordinary variation within a species, no more unusual than the variable dog breeds or different races of humans. Okay, so he's just observing something we can see every day, okay, in life. That doesn't mean that evolution occurred. Part of the problem is the hazy definition of species. Darwin himself considered a loose term and balked at defining it. He said, I look at the term species as one arbitrarily given for the sake of convenience to a set of individuals closely resembling each other, that it does not essentially differ from the term variety, which is given to less distinct and more fluctuating forms. And this is getting deep here. At the Scopes trial, her famous trial about evolution, Horatio Newman, a zoologist from the University of Chicago, said, the species is a unit of classification, but there is serious doubt as to whether species have any reality outside the minds of taxonomists. Okay, so it's a hazy thing. People have different definitions of what a species is. To this day, taxonomists are constantly adjusting the classification of, and the science is inexact. Around 1940, evolutionists Theodos Dobzhansky and Ernest Mayr expounded a reproductive definition. Animals that did not interbreed, they said, were separate species. That's kind of what I was taught in school. If they could breed together, they were the same species. If they couldn't breed, they were different species. But even that doesn't hold up, because dogs are considered different species than coyotes and wolves and jackals, but occasionally they can still interbreed with any of them. So apparently the definition is not immutable. Okay, it changes. As Niles Eldridge of the American Museum of Natural History wrote in New Scientist, Darwin, it has now become commonplace to acknowledge, never really addressed the origin of the species in his book of that title. It discussed survival of the fittest, but not arrival of the fittest. Okay, we all agree survival of the fittest, yes. You watch nature videos, if some animal's slow or can't keep up, or, they're going to get picked off. I preached a message to the kids, about fences, and about the wild, and, how the zoo protects them and takes care of them, and they got walls, and, they all want to be free. And I was showing how dangerous the jungle was, and, their animals are getting a drink, and the alligator, pops out and pulls them in, and, it's a jungle out there, okay, in the animal kingdom, and it's, yes, everybody realizes survival of the fittest, and we already talked about how the intermediate stages would really get picked off by survival of the fittest. Okay, survival of the fittest would really work against evolution. He also talked about, I forgot to mention, how organs, irreducible complexity. Okay, how if you have a mechanism and it has a bunch of parts, you can't take one part out and it still works. Okay, that's irreducibly complex. Okay, like a mousetrap. If you take one part out, it's not going to work. And they're saying, well, they evolved each of these parts till it finally functioned. Well, that wouldn't happen, would it? Because those other parts are useless. It wouldn't evolve all these useless parts and then finally get the last piece of the puzzle and then it works. Okay, that's not how things work. And we can't evolve organs that don't function that we need over thousands of years. But that's the problem. So really, yes, we agree. There's some things that we see. We see survival of the fittest, but how did these animals get there? H.S. Lisbon, professor of physics at the University of Manchester, Britain, wrote, Darwin's book on the origin of the species I find quite unsatisfactory. It says nothing about the origin of species. It is written very tentatively with a special chapter on difficulties on theory. At least he's honest, okay? At least he's saying, that scientists don't want to say there's things wrong or there's problems. Some will, but at least he's saying there's problems. I don't understand how these things happen. It includes a great deal of discussion on why evidence for natural selection does not exist in the fossil record. Zoologist Harold G. Coffin concluded that Darwin related a partial truth. We must admit that Darwin did see different variations from one island to another in the Galapagos, and he did see evidence that made it necessary for him to discard a belief that living things did not change. But they were relatively minor, and he had no compelling evidence that forced him to believe in limitless transformation. Darwin made a common mistake, that of either or. Either species were fixed or unlimited change could occur. But the truth lies between the two extremes. Okay, you can take something too far. Okay, yeah, it's happening. We can see you can breed different horses, different traits. We can see that change in a species, but you can't take that too far. Has anyone ever witnessed the creation of a new species? Okay, this is the key. We're not seeing evolution happen, okay? Geneticist Thomas Hunt Morgan, who won a Nobel Prize for his work on heredity, acknowledged, within the period of human history, we do not know of a single instance of the transformation of one species into another. If we apply the most rigid and extreme test used to distinguish wild species from each other. What is he saying? We can't observe it. Okay, there's people pushing to make evolution a law. Okay, a law, you have to observe it. It has to be repeatable. You have to be able to see it. Okay, it's not science if you make up something and you don't observe it and you think, well, I just think this happened. I don't have evidence for it, but I think it could happen. We can't see it. We've never seen it in history of man, but, I know it has happened. And it's a law. That's science. That's not science. It's actually anti-science. Okay? Darwin, Colin Patterson, director of the British Museum of Natural History, said, "No one has ever produced a species by mechanisms of natural selection. No one has gotten near it, and most of the current argument in neo-Darwinism is about this question." Okay? Serious question. There's no evidence. We don't see it in the fossil record. We don't see it happening now. Thousands of years, we haven't seen new species formed. Darwin himself could not document a bona fide case. He wrote, "We cannot prove that a single species has changed." So you're forming a whole theory, and we're teaching public school kids this happened, and we don't see it happening. We don't have any evidence that it's even happened. There is a case frequently cited by evolutionists as living proof of Darwin's theory. It's the peppered moth. Anybody get taught that in public school? Yeah, I remember that. Yep, I remember in my textbook I said the peppered moth there, and this was their example of evolution. I'll explain it if you weren't taught it. Peppered moth is a British species that come in white and black varieties. Before 1850, the black ones were quite rare. Nearly all peppered moths were white. The Industrial Revolution changed this. And the reason is that peppered moths, they sit on tree trunks. Okay, and pollution killed the lichen on the trees and blackened them with soot. As a result, preying birds could better see the white moths. The black moths, however, previously quite visible, were now camouflaged. Okay, so what do you think happened? All the white moths got picked off, and the black moths were the main ones, and they grew, and the white ones changed. By 1895, in a role reversal, 98% of peppered moths were black. Recent pollution controls, however, have caused the resurgence of the light-colored ones. Okay, Darwinists hail this as evolution occurring before our eyes. Okay, is that evolution? It's survival of the fittest, right? Okay, but did a new species evolve, or was that always there? Okay, they already had the capacity. We already had black and white ones. Yes, it's survival of the fittest. Yes, one didn't survive and the other one did. Okay, is a valid example of natural selection in the fittest surviving, but does it constitute evolution? The white and black moths are varieties of the same species. Both existed before pollution brought a shift. No new species are formed. Okay, so nobody's arguing about survival of the fittest and natural selection. Okay, that's kind of obvious. Nobody's arguing that, but does that create new species? That's not the peppered moth is not an example of a new species. It was always there. The eminent French zoologist Grassi said, "The evolution in action," quotes, "of J. Huxley and other biologists is simply the observation of demographic facts, local fluctuations of genotypes, geographical distributions." Okay, what does that mean? Big words. It just means the population is shifting, okay? There were more whites and less black. Now there's more black, less white, and then it switched back. Okay, that's just demographics changing. That's not evolution. Often the species concerned have remained practically unchanged for hundreds of centuries. Fluctuations as a result of circumstances with prior modification of the genome does not imply evolution, and we have tangible proof of this in many unchanging species. So the black moths were always there, the white moths were always there. There's no change in either of them, just the amount of them. That's not proof of evolution, that's proof of survival of the fittest. Okay, breeders of dogs and horses have isolated animals with traits they thought desirable. This has given rise to new varieties, but not new species. Okay, so the original dogs off the ark had all these characteristics that we see in dogs today. So they started breeding. Well, this one has, taller, or this one has this trait, and we're going to breed it with this one, and we're going to highlight this trait, and we have all these different dogs breeds, but they're the same species. They're still dogs. In nature, a few animals sometimes become geographically isolated. The population they sire inherits their particular genes and thus their characteristics. Okay, so if one bird or one finch is stuck on an island, it's going to have those characteristics of the parents. This is essentially what happened to Darwin's finches. After becoming sequestered on islands, they individuated from other finches, but no new species emerged. So these examples, the finches, the moths, are not examples of new species. Darwin, however, as well as modern evolutionists, have cited breeding experiments as evidence for evolution. Darwin expected that breeders would, in time, develop genuine new species. They haven't. Remember, he wasn't even aware of the field of genetics, okay? He didn't really understand genetics and DNA, and we know that now. We've decoded most of DNA. I don't think we've even decoded all of it, but what we've come to realize is things are more and more complex than Darwin ever realized. I mean, we haven't even figured out everything about the brain and the human body and how it all works. The more we learn, the more we realize how complicated things are, more evidence for a designer. Francis Hitchings summed up the situation. Every series of breeding experiments that has ever taken place has established a finite limit to breeding possibilities. Genes are a strong influence for conservatism and allow only modest change. Left to their own devices, artificially bred species usually die out because they're sterile or less robust, or quickly revert to the norm. Okay, so he's saying you can breed, there's a limit to what you can breed, okay? And then there's going to be issues because you're limiting the gene pool of those animals. No one has ever grown black tulips or blue roses because the genes are not there. You've got to have the genes there to be able to breed it, right? Okay? And we know, how do you get the genes? Their only answer is mutations, but mutations don't create new information, okay? Luther Burbank, the famed American plant breeder, said, "I know from my experience that I can develop a plum 1/2 inch long or one 2.5 inches long, with every possible length in between. But I am willing to admit that it is hopeless to try to get a plum the size of a small pea or one as big as a grapefruit. I have roses that bloom pretty steadily for 6 months in the year, but I have none that will bloom 12, and I will not have. In short, there are limits to the development possible, and these limits follow a law. Plants and animals all tend to revert in successive generations toward a given mean or average." Okay, you just can't put, bunch of tall people and a tall girl and a tall guy and just keep, we're not going to get 10, 20 feet humans, okay? There is a limit. The more a species is pushed from the norm, the harder it gets. Evolutionist Ernest Mayr demonstrated this when he tried to modify fruit flies through breeding. The flies normally averaged 36 bristles on their body. When the insects were bred down to 25 bristles, they became sterile. Mayr also bred the flies upward, but when they reached 56 bristles, they again became sterile. Okay, there is a limit to genes, how far you can go. And Darwin did not realize that. He did not know that. He thought you could just keep going and get whatever you wanted, but you can't. If controlled conditions and intelligent planning cannot transform a species, how much less could natural selection operating under chance conditions without intelligence? Okay, I was talking with a pastor about he's breeding German shepherds, and we were talking about, he had a different color black one. He was talking about some of the stuff that goes into breeding dogs, okay? And, that takes intelligence. You look at these racehorse breeders, okay? They're finding the fastest. They're the most intelligent. They're trying to find they're doing all this, and there's a limit even with intelligent people, doing it on purpose. And you're saying nature can do it, limitlessly without any intelligent planning. Suppose we want an elephant with long trunks. So we paired off long trunk elephants and allowed only their offspring with the longest trunks to mate, and so forth. We should get some long trunks that way, but never trunks 1,000 feet long. Genes impose a limit. Okay, I remember getting taught in public school, and I think it was really outdated material, and I think a lot of its reading has been disproven, but they're talking about horses, how they turned into giraffes. They just wanted to reach the taller leaves, and the taller ones made it because the leaves would get eaten off, and then eventually the horses turned into giraffes. And I'm like, that doesn't seem right, and I realized I wish I had my old history biology textbook from when I was in school, because I know a lot of it has been proven false and a lot of it's junk. I don't know what they have in the modern ones, but I remember them trying to tell me that a horse, they just stretch their neck, and the tall horses would turn into a giraffe, and it doesn't work that way. That's not how genes work. But Darwin, ignorant of genetics, declared, "I can see no limit to the amount of change, to the beauty and complexity of the co-adaptions between all organic beings, one with another and with their physical conditions of life, which may been affected in the long course of time through nature's power of selection, that is, by survival of the fittest." So he really didn't understand what was going on. He thought there's no limit. They can just keep going. If you start breeding the tallest neck horses, they'll eventually turn into a giraffe, okay? He didn't see a limit to it, but that's not how it works. The genes must be there to begin with. Modern Darwinists, of course, have theorized that genes will transcend their limits through mutation. But we already discussed that mutations don't give new information, okay? They scramble what's already there, okay? And that's unsupportable. Evolutionist Richard Goldsmith, one of the 20th century's most eminent geneticists, acknowledged, "It is true that nobody thus far has produced a new species or genus." Isn't this amazing that they're admitting this? Okay, this is not creationists. This is evolutionists saying, we've never seen it happen, but we're going to teach it in schools as fact, and you can't teach any other alternate. This is fact. We know it's true, even though we haven't seen it happen. By macroevolution, it's equally true that nobody has ever produced even a species by the selection of micromutations. Okay, so they're admitting that we got this theory, this is what we know is true, don't question us, but we've never seen it happen, but we just know it happened. Plant and animal breeders don't manufacture new genes. They simply use the genetic information that is already there. In fact, their practices result in a loss of information. Okay, think about that. If you've got the original dog that came off the ark, it's got all the genes of all the dogs. When we breed it to a pit bull or a bulldog, Okay, we've gotten rid of all the other genes and we've gone down, so there's a loss of information. The original dogs had all those genes, all those possibilities. When we breed, selectively breed, there's a loss of information, not more information. When you isolate, say, bulldogs, allowing them to mate only with other bulldogs, they stay bulldogs. They have lost the capacity to look any other way. I don't know who would want a bulldog. I know some people that I know some people in the church that breed them and love them. I'm like, those are the ugliest dogs. I mean, like they bred that way on purpose. I'm like, those things are ugly. They're so cute. They're like looking at them. I'm like, what do you see? It's like a face only a mother could love. And they're just like, this is the cutest thing. I'm looking at slobbering and it's just ugly. I'm like, who bred that on purpose to look that way? And then I found out they sell for like $5,000 each. I'm like, who's paying? You couldn't give me one for free. I mean, that thing's ugly. I won't tell my friend who loves them and has a couple of them that, well, I think I did tell him they're ugly, but I don't know why you'd do that on purpose. But thus the creation of special varieties such as Darwin's finches mean genetic information is gone, not gained as evolution claims. Okay, so their argument, they have no argument. We might borrow Goldsmith's use of macro and micro to note that while microevolution does occur, okay, and that means minor adaptations and variations within a species. So somebody says, does evolution occur? Micro does, okay, minor adaptations. Animals will adapt to, certain traits, certain things. But there's no such thing as macroevolution or conversion of one animal type into another into a new genus or other broad classification level. So we don't see it. It's not happening. Even the evolutionists will admit it, okay. That's macroevolution. We see variation, okay, yes, we got that. We see survival of the fittest. But Goldsmith would have known. He bred gypsy moths for 20 years and 1 million generations. All he ever got was more gypsy moths. Think about that, 1 million generations of selective breeding, okay? This is an intelligent person designing, doing this on purpose. 1 million generations, he can't breed a new species. It's the same thing, okay? You can't even do it on purpose. We don't see evidence for evolution. We don't see it in the fossil records. We know mutations can't give new information. They are harmful, okay? We know you can't evolve organs or certain things over time, okay? We know certain things are irreducibly complex, okay? You can't just get all these parts. We talked about the bombardier beetle, and it's got two gases. It's got two chambers, and it's got two gases in there, two liquids that combine, and it's got something that shoots them out. Okay, you're telling me that over thousands of years it evolved each of those pieces until they got the last piece that actually worked. Okay, you're telling me that it carried around two chemicals that could blow itself up before it evolved the mechanism to shoot it out. It doesn't seem like a very good evolutionary thing, but survival of the fittest really works against their definition of evolution. And we see that, okay, there's a limit to genes, okay, you can't just go on forever, there's a limit, and when you get to the limits, you have a loss of information, not a gain. So really, I hope this strengthens your faith. We are designed, we are created, there's an intelligent designer, there's a God that created us, we have a purpose. I think that's, we're seeing this rise in depression among young people, and we're seeing this rise in suicide. Why? Because they're being told what? You're an accident, you're a mistake, there's no purpose to life, there's no meaning, okay, there's no law, there's no rules, and then we're wondering why these kids are depressed, and you're just an animal is really what we're telling them. There's nothing special about you, but that's not true, okay? We're special, we're created. I find it amazing that man cannot reproduce what God's created. They try it with robots, and they're trying to base it off animals and man, and they're struggling to do that. And then they're going to say it's all accidental. It's all happened by chance. All these engineers and scientists are really copying the human eye, the human brain, how everything works, the mechanisms that supposedly just happen by chance with no designer, no creator. And it just blows my mind how they can believe both. But this should strengthen our faith. We're fearfully and wonderfully made, and God made the beauty and diversity to really show us that there's a creator. And we can see the evidence, and we have the same evidence. It's how you interpret the evidence, okay? And we look at the evidence, which does it fit better, creation or evolution? And we really see that it fits creation. We were created. There is a God, and hopefully this strengthens your faith. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we love you, dear Lord. We thank you for creating us, that we have a purpose here. And dear Lord, help us to fulfill that purpose, to love and worship you and serve you. And thank you for all that you've done for us. In Jesus' name, amen. You're dismissed.